The sea keeps secrets the way old houses keep their dead, quietly, patiently, with a kind of indifferent permanence that outlasts every question we bring to the shore. Sailors have always known this. They've always understood that the ocean is not merely a body of water, but a body of memory, vast, cold, and fundamentally unknowing. And sometimes, very rarely, the sea offers up not an answer, but a riddle. It's not a wreck, not a grave, but something stranger and more unsettling than either. Sometimes it offers a ghost. Welcome back to Whispered Chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore. We have spent time in the fall of empires. Today we turn to something smaller, and perhaps more unsettling. A mystery that offers no answers at all. It's not a ghost of mist and moaning, not the theatrical haunting of folklore, but a ghost in the truest, most quietly devastating sense of the word. A presence defined entirely by an absence. A thing that exists because something else no longer does. On a gray December morning in 1872, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a ship was found sailing. Her canvas was partially set, her hull was sound, her cargo was largely untouched. She moved through the water like a vessel with purpose, like a ship that knew where it was going. But there was no one at the wheel. There was no one in the rigging. There was no one anywhere on board. 10 people had been living on that ship. A captain, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, 7 experienced sailors. And then, between one entry in a logbook and the moment of discovery, they were simply gone. Not a body, not a farewell, not a single credible explanation that has satisfied the world in the century and a half since. The ship was called the Mary Celeste. Her story is not a fairy tale or a campfire legend. It is history. Documented, investigated, argued over, and ultimately stubbornly unresolved history. And that is precisely what makes her echo so long and so strange. Let us go back to the beginning. The ship that would become famous was built in 1860 in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia. She was originally christened the Amazon, and her early years were not particularly auspicious. She ran aground. She suffered damage. Her first captain died of illness shortly after command. She changed hands several times across the following decade, acquiring an unremarkable reputation. A working vessel with working vessel problems. In 1868, she was badly damaged and sold, registered under American ownership and rebuilt. Her name was changed to the Mary Celeste. A new name, a new chapter, or so it seemed. By 1872, she was owned by a consortium of investors including James Winchester, a New York shipping merchant, and she was placed under the command of a man named Benjamin Spooner Briggs. It is worth pausing here to think about Benjamin Briggs, not as a figure in a mystery, but as a man. He was 37 years old. He came from a Massachusetts seafaring family. He had been at sea his entire adult life and had commanded several vessels before the Mary Celeste. By all contemporary accounts, he was regarded as an exceptionally capable, sober, and religious man. He did not drink. He ran a disciplined but fair ship. He was a thoroughly respectable captain. He was also, in October of 1872, a husband and a father. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, was 30 years old. Was educated, thoughtful, and she wrote letters home. Letters that survive to this day, warm and alive with ordinary human feeling. She played the melodeon, a small keyboard instrument, and she had brought it aboard for the voyage. Their older child, a son named Arthur, was 7 and had been left with his grandmother in Massachusetts, likely because the voyage was expected to be a long one. But their younger child, 2-year-old Sophia Matilda Briggs, came with them. The family would make the crossing together. The crew numbered 7 men. We know their names. Albert Richardson was the first mate, a trusted and experienced sailor. Andrew Gilling was the second mate. The cook and steward was Edward Head, and there were 4 German sailors. Volkert Lorenzen, his brother Boz Lorenzen, Arian Martins, and Gottlieb Gondeschel. This was the full company of the Mary Celeste. 10 souls aboard a brigantine of roughly 280 tons. Setting out from Staten Island, New York, on the 7th of November, 1872. Their destination was Genoa, Italy. Their cargo was 1,701 barrels of commercial alcohol. Raw, industrial grade, produced by Meisner Ackerman and Company. It was not drinking alcohol, but denatured industrial spirit intended for fortifying wines. It was a legal, routine cargo for transatlantic trade, though it was not without its hazards. Sarah Briggs wrote to her mother-in-law just before departure. The letter is cheerful, practical, and quietly lovely. She wrote about the weather, about little Sophia, about the melodeon she hoped to play on calm evenings, expressed hope for a pleasant passage. It is the last letter she ever wrote. It is the last word we have from anyone aboard the Mary Celeste. Now we turn to the brigantine Dei Gratia. She left New York 8 days after the Mary Celeste. On November 15th, bound for Gibraltar with petroleum cargo, commanded by Captain David Morehouse, acquainted with Benjamin Briggs, it had dined together in New York, a detail whose significance would only later become apparent. The Dei Gratia made reasonable progress across the Atlantic. On December 4th, 1872, near the Azores, in the early afternoon, the helmsman spotted a vessel in the distance, appearing to behave strangely. She was yawing, swinging side to side, her sails in disarray, clearly not under proper control. Captain Morehouse observed through his glass, then decided to bring the Dei Gratia closer. What the Dei Gratia crew found is a historical record. The plain truth is strange enough. First Mate Oliver DeVoe and 2 crew members rowed over and boarded the Mary Celeste. They found a ship wet but largely intact, water between decks, 3.5 feet in the hold. The pumps were peculiar. One disassembled parts lying about, as if someone had been working. Sails were in disorder, some carried away. Foresail and upper foretopsail were gone. The 4 lower topsail hung by its corners. The rigging suffered damage. The binnacle, housing the compass, was displaced and damaged. The wheel was unlashed, free to spin. The ship's only lifeboat, stored on the main hatch, was simply gone. The davits showed ropes hastily cut, not properly released. The cargo of alcohol was substantially intact. 9 barrels leaked or were damaged. Ship's papers were largely missing, though the logbook was found. Captain's navigation instruments were gone. Sextant, chronometer, personal effects remained. Sophia's toys were there. Sarah Briggs's melodeon stood silent in the cabin. A small child's clothing was folded neatly. No warm food, despite later legends. The galley stove was displaced, likely by rough weather and cold. Food and water remained, but no one was there to eat or drink any of it. The final logbook entry was November 24th, 1872, placing her near Santa Maria Island. Found 10 days later, hundreds of miles east, she had sailed on her own for 2 weeks. Captain Morehouse made the entirely reasonable decision to sail the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, with a skeleton crew from the Dei Gratia aboard her. Both ships arrived at Gibraltar on the 13th of December, and it was there that the matter entered the realm of official record, and, very quickly, of official suspicion. The British Vice-Admiralty Court in Gibraltar convened an inquiry under Frederick Solly Flood. Here the story takes on a different and less charitable tone, because Flood approached the proceedings with prosecutorial enthusiasm. He was convinced from almost the beginning that something criminal had taken place. He ordered a thorough examination of the ship. He looked for evidence of violence. He found certain stains aboard that he was convinced were blood. He found what he described as a mark on the hull consistent with damage from an axe. He was building a case for mutiny or murder. The problem was that the physical evidence simply did not support him. The supposed bloodstains were examined and could not be confirmed. Later analysis suggested they were not blood at all. The supposed axe marks were re-examined. The narrative of violence could not be constructed. There was no blood. There were no bodies. There were no signs of a struggle. Nothing pointing toward mutiny, piracy, or murder. Nothing except the absence of the people themselves. Flood's suspicions fell upon Captain Morehouse and the crew of the Dei Gratia, suggesting they might have conspired or committed violence. But this, too, collapsed under scrutiny. The Dei Gratia crew received their salvage award, though a reduced one, reflecting the court's lingering unease rather than any finding of wrongdoing. No charges were ever brought. No crime was ever established. The mystery remained exactly what it had been, a mystery. So what did happen? What could have happened? Historians and maritime scholars have, over the decades, proposed a number of explanations, and the most plausible share a common thread. They center on the cargo. Consider the alcohol. 1,701 barrels of industrial spirit. 9 of those barrels were later found to have been damaged or empty. Alcohol vapor, particularly in a confined hold, is extraordinarily volatile. If the hold had not been adequately ventilated, if vapor had been allowed to accumulate, the opening of a hatch could have produced a sudden release of pressure. It's not an explosion in the dramatic, destructive sense. It's not fire, but a sharp, startling blast of pressure and vapor that might have blown open the hatch covers and alarmed everyone aboard very severely. There is some physical evidence consistent with this. The hatch covers were found off their fittings. The cargo itself was intact, unburned, suggesting that if there was a pressure event, it did not ignite the vapor, but expelled it. And here is the critical human truth of the situation. If you were Benjamin Briggs, a careful and experienced captain, and your hold had just produced a violent expulsion of alcohol vapor, and you did not know whether fire was about to follow, what would you do? You would get your family and your crew off that ship. You would take to the lifeboat, and you would tow behind the vessel at a safe distance while you waited to see whether she was going to burn. This theory, developed carefully by several researchers and most compellingly elaborated in the work of maritime historians in recent decades, counts for nearly everything. The missing lifeboat, the apparent haste suggested by the ropes on the davits, the missing navigation instruments, which a captain abandoning ship would almost certainly take with him. The fact that the personal effects were still aboard, they left quickly, not permanently. The intact cargo. The absence of any sign of violence. They were not running from danger aboard the ship. They were waiting beside the ship, at a distance they believed was safe. And then the rope broke, or was cut by debris, or was simply not long enough when the wind shifted or strengthened. The Mary Celeste, still partially under sail, pulled free of the lifeboat. The lifeboat, with 10 people in it, 2-year-old Sophia and her parents, and 7 sailors, was left in the North Atlantic in late November, hundreds of miles from land, in conditions that had already proven rough enough to damage rigging and displace the galley stove. The ship sailed on without them, indifferent, leaving them behind in the cold and the dark of the open sea. No lifeboat was ever found. No bodies were ever recovered. No trace of any of the 10 people who had boarded the Mary Celeste in New York ever surfaced anywhere. The Atlantic simply took them, as the Atlantic has always taken those who fall into its care without the means to return. This is, of course, not the only theory. Others have proposed a waterspout, a seaquake, navigation instrument malfunction, even ergot poisoning from contaminated food producing mass panic. But none of these explain the evidence as cleanly as the alcohol vapor scenario. None of them account for everything. None of them, it must be said, can be proven. This is history, as it so often is. The most reasonable explanations still separated from certainty by the unbridgeable distance of the unknowable. Now, how did the Mary Celeste become the legend she is? How did a genuine maritime mystery become encrusted with Flying Dutchman mythology? With warm breakfasts and half-drunk cups of tea and clocks still ticking? The answer is Arthur Conan Doyle. In 1884, 12 years after the incident and before he had created Sherlock Holmes, the young Conan Doyle published a short story called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement in the Cornhill magazine. It was fiction. He changed the ship's name slightly. He invented characters. He invented a dramatic narrative involving race and murder and a fanatic's revenge. But it was so vividly written, so compellingly constructed, that many readers did not fully register that it was fiction. The story spread. Details from the story migrated into what people believed to be the factual record. The dramatic embellishments, the meals still on the table, the coffee still warm, captain's pipe still smoldering, are almost entirely traceable to fictional accounts and sensational newspaper expansions of those accounts, rather than to any actual testimony or evidence. This is itself a kind of lesson. The mystery of the Mary Celeste was real and strange enough without invention. But a real mystery that says we don't know is unsatisfying, unlike a fictional one with a dark, elaborate answer. We kept adding to her story because the true documented story ended not with revelation, but with silence. And silence is extraordinarily hard for human minds to accept. The Mary Celeste herself continued to sail, passing through multiple owners, becoming difficult to insure and crew. Sailors are superstitious, and her name had become unlucky in their world. In 1885, her owner, Gilman Parker, deliberately ran her aground on a reef off Haiti. This was later established as an insurance fraud scheme. Parker attempted to collect on her inflated value. He was prosecuted for fraud, and though his case ended in a mistrial, his reputation and finances were destroyed. He died in poverty shortly afterward. Mary Celeste, the ship that survived whatever happened in 1872, ended her days broken on a Haitian reef, deliberately wrecked by a man trying to profit from her name. There is something fitting and deeply sad in that ending. As for the families left behind, Sarah Briggs's mother received her daughter's last cheerful letter. The Briggs family was left with unanswered questions. Arthur, the 7-year-old boy, grew up without his family. He lived in a world that could not tell him what had happened to them. Why does this story still haunt us? Why, 150 years later, does the name Mary Celeste resonate so? That quality of a sound heard in an empty room? Think it touches something specific in our relationship with the unknown. Most great mysteries involve grand forces, wars, empires, catastrophes, clashes of enormous powers. But the Mary Celeste is intimate. She is small. A family on a ship, doing an ordinary thing, crossing an ocean. They vanished not into war or plague or vast impersonal mechanisms of historical tragedy. They vanished into an ordinary Tuesday at sea. Into weather that was bad, but not extraordinary. Into unremarkable cargo. Into the gap between one moment and the next. A gap we all live beside every day, and prefer not to examine too closely. The sea kept them. The Mary Celeste sailed on alone, perhaps the most haunting image of all. It's not a ghost ship full of spectral crew, but an empty ship that simply continued, knowing its heading. It did not mourn what it had lost. The Atlantic in December, gray, enormous, and entirely indifferent, receiving both the ship and its people, giving nothing back. Some stories remain echoes because they were never fully resolved. There is a truth in an echo. It is not the original sound, but not silence either. It is proof something was spoken. The Mary Celeste is that echo. 10 lives, 1 ship, 1 logbook entry, then nothing. The sea between the Azores and the silence of a century and a half of wondering. We are still wondering. Thank you for sailing through this shadow with me today. The Mary Celeste is a story I return to. Each time I find something new to sit with, some detail that catches the light differently. I'd love to know what you think happened out there in the North Atlantic in late November 1872. The comments are open. And on a story like this, the conversation is always worth reading. If you have a theory, a question, or simply a feeling about it, leave it below. If these echoes of forgotten lore are the company you want to keep, consider subscribing and ringing that bell so the next whisper finds you when it arrives. More stories wait in the dark, stories of vanished people, ships, cities, civilizations that left questions where answers should be. We will find our way to all of them, one shadow at a time. Perhaps keep a kind thought for Sarah Briggs and little Sophia, and the 7 sailors, whose names we still know, out there somewhere in the long Atlantic silence. Until we meet again, stay curious and stay safe.